where they know me best. And equally challenging, I will beat Donald Trump in his state where they know me best. Cool. Tyler, go for it, and Tyler will give you the microphone. Start up front.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you for coming in. My name's Nick.
Nick.
Yeah. Thank you for coming out. Appreciate it. Let me start with the elephant in the room, healthcare. You have said that you favor an incremental approach towards healthcare rather than jumping into a Medicare for all sort of policy. Is that correct?
I would not have characterized that way, but I'll just say yes, and then I'll answer your question. Go ahead.
All right. I can understand from a healthcare standpoint that trying to have a flag day where all of a sudden we're going to jump from what we have right now to Medicare for all may not be viable. What's your long-term strategy? Where should we be in 20 years for healthcare? What is it that you want to achieve through incremental policy changes?
Where I disagree. I mean, what you said was exactly true. I just don't agree with the word incremental, but we can argue that. First of all, I want to help people now. And I know that Speaker Pelosi, I don't ask her what her agenda is. I don't push her. I do know that though the House, we could, and if we have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic President in 2021, we could pass Medicare at 50 right away. And what Medicare at 50 means, I want to find ways to help people right now. And I would say, your question in 20 years, yeah, we will cover the whole country in a Medicare plan like that. I mean, I would think 20 years, I would hope sooner than that we would get to real universal coverage. With Connie, it started well before actually I knew her. Back in '92, I promised in my first congressional race I'd pay my own health insurance until Congress passed it. I paid my own insurance for a decade, more than a decade. We were on the Obamacare exchanges now, as millions of them, some in this room, and millions of other Americans are. But so I would do several things now. I would expand Medicare to 50, make it voluntary. I would pass the bill that Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island and I wrote back in 2009. We fell short on the votes. I would pass a public option, giving people of any age an option to go in. I would also fix the consumer protections for pre-existing condition, because you know the insurance companies with Trump are going to try to scale that back every chance they get. And then you go after the cost of prescription drugs. And we know the VA negotiates drug prices directly with the drug companies, and VA prices. I met a woman today named Miss Smith or Hart Smith, I can't remember, a woman that was president of the AFG local and works at the VA. The VA gets their drugs a lot cheaper because they use the power buying, if you will. So I think you do all of those things. So the difference is, I mean, I understand, I understand the appeal of Medicare for all, but I want to get something done that will help people now, and I think expansion of Medicare, making it choice is the way to go. Thanks for that. If you want to just talk really loud, and I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, that's fine.
You can do that.
Yeah, thank you. I was one that applied back here. I used to live in Ravenna, Ohio. My father was in the Navy. He was stationed close to there. And when I was there, I remember there was a commercial where there was a family that was about to move out of the home. And, this little child was asking the mother, where are we moving to? And the mother would say, I don't know. And the reason why, is because there was a lot of manufacturing jobs that were losing. And this isn't different. I was much younger in those days. I remember that commercial, it really stuck out to me. As I started following politics more, I started understanding that there's a lot of people that are going through that, regardless of their political affiliation. They're losing their jobs. They're really insecure. I think it's a good chunk of the reason you've done so well in a maybe a conservative state is because you have articulated that message and you really started fighting for working people. And I really appreciate that. And if you do enter, I will more than likely start supporting you. But I do want to make one more point that I talked to a lot of people from 2016, and a lot of what people say is both parties are the same. And I'm a registered Democrat. I've been a registered Democrat for as long as I know, and I voted Democrat for my entire life. But I think you could change it. Like if you don't, the Democrats really don't start saying there's a difference, I fear the ultimate catastrophe for this country that Donald Trump is going
Well,
to.
okay, that's exactly right, and I don't know what's going to happen. But when I think about, when you look at Donald Trump, you first of all, you understand, all of us understand he's a bully, and you've all had bullies that you've seen growing up over the years, and some adult bullies even, as he is, kind of an adult bully. But I also know about bullies, they're all cowards. And you stand up to Trump. I will go, I've been in the Mahoning Valley recently, Youngstown, where a GM plant is about to close with 4,500 lost jobs. They've already laid off 3,000 in a valley, in an area of, that area of 450,000. And not just east of where you live. In fact, people in Ravenna work there. So.
My dad worked in Youngstown.
Okay. And Trump will do nothing for them, and I will make the case. Trump did better in the Mahoning Valley than any Republican had done since Reagan. And I will make the case that he betrays workers, and he betrays workers every day. He betrays them with his cabinet. He betrays them with LRB. He betrays them with disaster workers. So I would say that I don't think any Democrat will have trouble making the contrast between him and between Trump and our nominee. But I also think that you've got to do it. You've got to do it in blunt language. You've got to stand up to him and recognize that bullies are cowards. And you've got to you've got to not let him distract us with all of his tweets and all of his idiocy, so that we get off our economic message. I said earlier, I'm pro-choice and pro-marriage equality, and out from the NRA, I win and conserve. I don't run up big margins in conservative any more than I talked to Governor Sisolak. When Governor Sisolak won his race by winning Washoe County and Clark County, and these other counties are tough. Democrats don't do as well in rural areas as I would like. But we got to cut our losses, and we do it by talking to them about the dignity of work and the dignity generally, restoring dignity to the White House. Somebody asked me the other day, what are the first couple things you do if you were president? As I thought about it, I'd given two answers. One is I would go to Brussels and Paris, or figuratively or literally, I don't think you leave the country, but I would re-engage with the world with NATO, saying we live in this world, and I would go again, literally or figuratively, to Paris and get back into peace and the climate change. But the other issue is, what do you do here? And what I would do here is this, and I've done this a number of times with banks in Ohio, and with big hospitals, and with big insurance companies. Every high-rise building has, almost every major company, a hospital or a bank or somebody, has a lot of low-income workers doing security, doing custodial work, doing food service. Many cases now, particularly the airlines, they have outsourced those workers to companies you've never heard of. Person that pushes the wheelchair at the airport here, probably, if it's like airports everywhere else, probably doesn't work for Alaska Airlines or United, or doesn't work for the Las Vegas airport. They work for a contract you've never heard of. Many of them, most of them in most places around the country, work for a sub-minimum wage. They rely on tips. And the company will say, we don't know what we pay them. Well, yeah, you do. You negotiate the contract. You really figure it out. So I would just think about, I would bring in the CEOs of a lot of these big companies and say, all those jobs you outsource, all that work you outsource, you do it so you can wash your hands of paying them $11 an hour. So I know you pay all your other workers $15 an hour. I don't want to embarrass you, but let's work together so we can show that these workers aren't invisible and actually start raising wages when these companies can afford to do it. Thanks, you go first.
So hi, just my senator.
Hi.
I came for you, but I really came for Connie.
Can you see her live? Thank you. And what is your name?
Christina.
Hi, Christina.
And I live here, not Ohio, because of economic opportunity. And I would ask you, are you in favor, as we are increasingly faced by these challenges you mentioned, and automation, do you favor guaranteed basic income or guaranteed job?
Well, I don't know how you do a guaranteed job. I mean, I would like everybody to have an opportunity to work, and there are ways of stimulating that. I know the popular thing to say is let's guarantee a job for everybody. I would want to figure out how to do that. Guaranteed income, I wouldn't use that term, but I would say this, that 4 years ago, Nancy Pelosi in the House and I in the Senate expanded and made permanent a big part of the Earned Income Tax Credit, which was called, other than the Affordable Care Act, the best anti-poverty measure that passed the Congress in 25 years. And Obama signed it, we got it through a Republican House and Senate. We got him to threaten to veto to another bill unless he did. I would expand the child tax credit. I've worked with a number of my colleagues on how you, suggest there's two books to read that are really, really good about this. That I obviously don't know the backgrounds of most of you or any of you, but you're here. I was talking to Brenda Frank. Where's Brenda? I was talking to her earlier. Well, but this is the reason I like coming to Democratic events is, I mean, you like cheer all the time, that's one. But the other, I mean, Brenda, if I could say this about what you told me, Brenda devotes a big part of her life to helping the homeless in this city. You know, this county has a pretty terrible homeless problem, as so many places do, and probably it's maybe a little worse here because the weather's better than it would be in a colder climate, but it's also economic factors. But there's two books I would inform me so much about fighting on these issues. One is a book called $2 a Day, about all the unbelievable number of people in this country that are so resourceful and entrepreneurial. They don't have a job, they figure out how to live by doing all kinds of illegal things, but all kinds of things just to get by. And the other book is by Matthew Desmond called Evicted. And he spends several months in a white trailer park at the edge of Milwaukee, and then several months in an African-American section of Milwaukee. And he sees what happens when people are evicted. One of the things he says is the rent eats first. If you don't have the money to pay your rent, or if you spend on something else, everything turns upside down. So you take money from everything else so you don't get evicted, because if you get evicted, you lose your stuff, your kid changes school districts, you have all the problems that you never really catch up. So that's what spurs me on call it whatever terms you call it. It spurs me on what we do with the child tax credit and what we do with the earned income tax credit. But it's also tax policy, trade policy. I have a bill that this will make you smile if for whatever reason. I have one bill called the Patriot Corporation Act, which I presented to Trump, and he said he liked it, and then he, of course, did his sellout tax bill. But it basically says if you pay decent wages and you provide decent benefits and you do your production in the United States, you get a lower tax rate. But the other bill, the sort of the twin of that bill, is called the corporate freeloader fee. And it's when a big company that has executives making millions of dollars a year pays workers $8 and $10, $12 an hour, and those workers are eligible for Section 8 housing tax credits. They're eligible for earned income tax credit. They're eligible for food stamps. They're eligible for Medicaid. They pay a corporate freeloader fee to reimburse taxpayers for subsidizing these employees. So we need to, I know that Congress isn't going to pass that any faster than Congress passes single payer. I do know that that's the debate we should have, instead of providing over 75% of this Trump tax cut going to the richest 1%. So I'll do two. I talked too long with this. I'll do you. You do one, and then you can do one, and then we'll do one other.
Hi, Senator. My name is Marcy Ramirez. I live here in Henderson. And here in Nevada, we knock on a lot of doors prior to an election. And we get a lot of feedback, and we give a message to get out and vote. When we knock on the doors prior to this presidential election, what is the message you want us to get from you so they vote for you in a caucus?
Whoa. Way to go, Ms. Ramirez. I got to be ready. I think you talk about restoring dignity to our country internationally, but more importantly, restoring dignity that invisible people in this society will be seen again, that government will be on the side of workers, whether it's a tax law that understands this is getting to be too long a door conversation, I understand. Whether it's a tax law that understands you build the economy, not trickle down. Tax cuts, you build it from the middle out, and you reward work, and you reward people that are trying to get ahead and not making much money, and you build the economy that way because you increase demand and all that. But I think fundamentally it's dignity of work and bringing dignity to the Oval Office in this country in a way that you don't want to see what this country looks like if Trump has 8 years. Okay. Last question.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for coming.
Sure. Enjoyed being here. Thanks.
This is a foreign policy question. Okay. My wife and I had the opportunity to live and work in the Middle East for 9 years. So we understand that region. We still have many.
What country?
4.5 years in Kuwait, 4.5 in Bahrain. We were there before 9/11. Went through all of that. We made some very, very close friends there. Second to that is in the Palestinian community. Now, you know that dealing in the Middle East is all about bargaining chips, okay, to try to make progress towards helping to bring peace and to try to get some justice for the Palestinian people also. Now, we've seen this current president do some very screwy things, okay? Things like moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. America got nothing for that. Withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. America got nothing out of that. How do you address those kinds of issues to promote American interests there and American values of justice for people?
Thank you. And you concur with that, right? Okay. Yeah, okay, figure that. Okay. I think you start, thank you. I think you start with, you start with a cabinet that actually believes in public service. I sat, on swearing on State Union, I sat next to Kamala Harris, and we were kind of sitting in a place you could look sort of to our right, and you could see the 2 rows, I think it was 2 rows, of Trump cabinet people. And I was absolutely no fan of George Bush, and there were some very glaring exceptions to what I'm going to say. But Bush's cabinet had a number of people that actually believed in public service. I wouldn't put Dick Cheney in that category, or put Daniel Rumsfeld, but it had a number of people that cared about public service. And this cabinet doesn't, by and large. So that's the first problem. Second is, he made those decisions, and who knows how he made the Iran decision, but he made a decision in Syria. He's making decisions in the Jerusalem embassy, the embassy in Jerusalem, I think without consulting his own cabinet, let alone our allies. When you're levying tariffs, when you're understanding tariffs are a temporary tool for a long-term trade policy, they aren't meant to be there forever. Whether you're levying tariffs, whether you decide to pull out of Syria, whether you're moving the embassy in Jerusalem, whatever your relationship with Netanyahu, you do that with our allies. And he attacks he doesn't cooperate with them on much of anything, and we pay a price. Well, I think. Well, that's why I said at the beginning, you go to Brussels, literally and figuratively, and you tell the world, we believe in NATO, we don't want to be the world's policemen and women, but we do want to play a leading role. You go to Paris and you say, we want to be the leading role, play the leading role in climate change. You go to the Middle East, and you say, we want to figure out how to get back into, I'm not sure how you get back into the agreement per se, but you want to work with our allies to figure out how to work to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons. You engage. I voted against. I took on Bill Clinton my first year in office. Took him on. I opposed him on the North American Free Trade Agreement because we passed trade agreements. There's a fork in the road on trade agreements when you negotiate. Either you write an agreement for corporate interest or you write an agreement for workers. Every single time we write an agreement for corporate interest, I would want to see us engage in trade talks with unilaterally or multilaterally or bilaterally with countries, I mean bilaterally or multilaterally, on and lift workers in a way. And I'll close with this story to kind of illuminate what trade policy should be. Soon after we passed, 5 years after we passed NAFTA, Congress passed NAFTA, I flew to McAllen, Texas, and rented a car and went across the border. And I wanted to see what NAFTA looked like 5 years later. I went to neighborhoods. I saw there was no lifting up of the standard of living for the workers. You still saw the chemicals and effluent going through ditches. You saw homes built out of packing materials from the companies they work for. But here's what really mattered, but here's what is more illuminating. I went to an auto plant, and it looked just like an auto plant in Cleveland. It was modern, it was newer actually, modern, the floors were clean, the workers were working hard, the technology was up to date. But there was one difference between the auto plant in Mexico and the auto plant in Cleveland. The auto plant in Mexico didn't have a parking lot because the workers couldn't afford to buy the cars they made. And fundamentally in trade policy, I will look at governing, as I have in my career, through the eyes of what this means to workers. And I look at trade policy that way. Investors can do well with some of these trade agreements, but workers don't if wages continue to be suppressed in both countries. And that's what happened with these trade agreements. So it really, I tell that story because it sort of illuminates how I think we need to look at the world around us and how we need to look at our government.
Hey, honey, Marcy just got off work and drove 5 ways to get here. She'd like to ask.
Marcy, go for it.
Thank you so much. First, I want to thank you and commend you for sponsoring the Doggett Bill, and hopefully you've had a chance to get Stephen Horsford, back on board for that while you've been in town. I have a couple of questions, though. I'm in the Culinary 226. I'm a shop steward. I'm a contract committee member, and I'm a local activist. So I wanted to know that if you do run, what, if anything, you would do about overturning Janus? And the second question I have is about a local activist named Amber Evans, who became an activist after the killing of Tyree King in Columbus, Ohio. She's been missing for a couple of weeks, and the Columbus dive team only searched for her for 30 minutes. So I was wondering if there's any merit to people's suspicions that they're not searching for her because she was an activist.
I don't know about that. I would say that Black Lives Matter, and it's important what we do and how we do this. I have seen what happened with, Connie went to the funeral where Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old that was shot and killed and was not in any way a threat to anybody else. I forgot the Janet's question. I think that's, I don't know. I would love the Congress to figure out how to overturn that. We could, but I also know what happens with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court puts its thumb on the scales to support them, to lean to corporations over workers and Wall Street over consumers. And much of this is about the Supreme Court, but I think we have to have a very active labor agenda on getting workers better represented at the table. Overturning Janus is a big part of that. Was there a first part of the question I forgot?
That was it on the Janus.
Okay.
And then with the gag rule and the gag order.
Oh, and then you asked about Steve. Yeah, I just got a chance to
Pull that
30 minutes. Yeah, well, we talked about prescription drugs, and the Doggett bill is using governments, the buying power of government to negotiate drug prices with the drug companies, and that's something we've got to get serious about because the cost of prescription drugs, these drugs, drug company profits are up, drug company executive compensation's up, salaries, wages are flat, and drug prices keep going up. And your union has a good healthcare plan, but you have relatives that don't. I would guess, as most of you do, and so we have to be more aggressive in that.
So will you check on the Amber Evans situation, please?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Two old friends from Ohio here, Dick Wittenberg, a friend of mine from a long time ago, and Mike and Katie Nicely, thank you for being here, and he's head of the state building trade. If it's something really nice, go ahead and say it, otherwise the meeting's over.
First of all, I want to tell everybody this. First, thanks to the Madison County Party, State Party for having us here. Access and search in the airport there. She's from Hamilton County. So heads up for that.
1.2 million workers and 4,000 companies that are in big trouble if we don't fix this.
My question is, there's an economic crisis on each side of this thing. If you do nothing, this thing's gonna spiral out of control. Families are gonna be displaced, especially if they start enacting reforms, with that. The other part is if it goes too far without the governmental help, and that's what I'm looking for, where pension plans like myself back in Ohio, where we're part of that. The question I'm asking is, can we get more governmental help and not put in so much on the individual plans?
Understand the government help he's talking about is a loan, not a check from the government. It's a long-term loan that will be paid back. It's the bill that I introduced with some people in the House, Richie Neal, and we are committed to doing this. We're not going to get the bill exactly that way. I understand the divisions of labor.
And I think we're gonna get there. The last thing I wanna say, this guy is a real deal, not just because